Well, good morning, or as I said earlier, good afternoon, I guess, depending on where you're from. My name is Tom Robbins, and I'm with PlayFab, and I want to thank everyone today for joining us on one of our many webinars. And today we're focusing on what's in the box, creating chance mechanics and rewards. This was actually a webinar that was created by some email we got where people were asking about how they can do this with PlayFab and some best practices. And I'm really excited to say that Brendan Vanis, our Senior Developer Success Engineer, has kindly agreed to cover it for us today. And I want to thank him for joining us. And without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into the webinar. Brendan?
Right. Thanks, Tom. So hi, everybody. I am Brendan Vanis, the Senior Developer Success Engineer for PlayFab. So if you've been asking us questions, whether in our forums or directly in tickets, you've probably encountered me at some point, or any of the other members of the team who help you all out when you run into questions about how to use our functionality. Today I will be talking about chance mechanics and rewards. This is honestly, it's one of my favorite features in the system because it gives you so much opportunity for creating interesting ways to reward your players and so keep them engaged in your game. Here we go. There it is. All right. So the slide should be changing over on your view in just a moment, but I'll get into this. The overview of what we're going to talk about today. Describing a little bit of what I mean when I say chance mechanics. Oh, that's interesting. Hang on a sec, folks. It appears that you're not getting my screen just yet. Looks like it's taken a minute to get through. There it is. All right, there we go. Right, I'll talk a little bit about what I mean when I'm talking about chance mechanics and rewards, when you would want to use this in your game, why you would want to use it at all, and then I'll walk through a simple example of a single action type reward in a game, and then a more complex example, and we'll be spending a fair bit of time on that one because there's a lot of ground to cover. I'll also give you a word of advice about things you might want to consider not doing, and talk a little bit about what our future development thoughts are in this space. Okay, so defining the terms. So chance mechanics in games covers an enormous range of things you can do, including things like how much damage a player does when he's in a combat, or random dice rolls, card draws. Those are all mechanics that control the events of an interaction within the game, and they're quite common. Obviously, you're all very familiar with them. What we're going to be talking about very specifically, though, is the chance mechanics which generate rewards for your players. So the things that fall into this category are things like payout tables, what you get for taking certain actions in a game. And items that you can grant to players through different operations, whether it's completing a quest or defeating a monster, or really anything else in your game at all. Even you could do randomized daily rewards. I know that a lot of games do daily rewards, and most of the time they're fixed values day by day. But random chance there can also play out in an interesting way. And of course, random packs, and what I mean by that is the concept of a random card pack for a collectible card game, trading card game type of system. Okay, when? Well, I was just talking about this. Like I said, when you would want to use this is when you're giving people rewards for achievements, and it appears it appears you guys can't see. Oh, there we go. Okay, it did change over to the new screen. Rewards for achievements in games. You can see I've given you a few examples here of various games and the ways in which they're rewarding players with random things. Longevity bonuses is another one. So the players who've been in the game for a really long time, maybe you want to give them a special reward, a special type of treasure chest that has items in it that you can't normally get through gameplay. In-game purchases. You might be selling chests to players. You could have a system, and I'll be showing you a little bit about the container system in PlayFab, but if you're already familiar with it, you can define a container which holds objects, including random objects, and you can define separately a key which is necessary to open the chest. A chest doesn't have to have a key to open. So if you're creating a random card pack, for example, the card pack wouldn't have a key. It would just be a random card pack that sits in inventory. When the player wants to open it, you'd call the unlock container API call. That opens it up, and then you can give the items to the player. But if you have a chest, excuse me, which requires a key, they both have to be in the player's inventory for the player to be able to open the chest or container. And when that happens, if they have usage counts, they are consumable. The usage count will be decremented by 1 for each. So as an example, maybe over the course of gameplay, you give keys to the player, but you sell chests in your in-game store, or only give them out for special activities in the games in addition to selling them in the store. You could also give out random prizes as a result of two people who win in a special challenge or tournament in your game. Particularly for PvP type games, you're probably going to be considering the concepts of tournaments of some kind and what rewards you need to give to players. All right, and then in particular the question of why would you want to use this? It introduces the element of chance. Chance stimulates player engagement in many ways. Everybody enjoys the concept of what if, right? And the examples on the right are, well, at least the top two, are there to specifically address one question. I've been in a number of conversations where I've had people explain to me that in the concept that they're working on, they feel that chance plays no part, that the game should be entirely driven based upon player skill. And there are certainly some games where that's very appropriate. But for the majority of games, and you can see that fairly popular ones there, World Series of Poker and any fantasy league, those are games where there's certainly an element of chance. And I know you might be thinking that with a fantasy league, there isn't really chance because it's the skill of the player. But what it comes down to is you have no control over what that player's mindset is from day to day, or how much they've trained, how ready they are for the game. So realistically, that is a random chance as far as the individual player is concerned. In my own case, my personal life, I do kendo, and I know that in kendo, it is very much, I am in control of every aspect of what I do in any fight. And if I win or lose, it is entirely down to me, my training, my state of mind, and there's no luck involved. Now, when I lose, that means it's entirely my fault. So random chance, the other thing it does for games is it introduces the element of luck. So did you lose a game? Well, maybe it was just bad luck. Maybe you got a consistent run of bad cards. Maybe the random card packs that you got when you were trying to build out your deck didn't give you the cards that you really needed, so your deck isn't as strong as you'd like. And then, of course, the concept of risk and reward. And this isn't necessarily just about spending more money to get things. Maybe you have a virtual currency in your game, a grind currency, and players can build it up over time. And then you have different containers that you can give them with different reward models in them. So there's a container that will consistently give you a common or an uncommon item, and it randomly chooses from those. It's very inexpensive. Then somewhere in the middle range, you have a container that gives you a chance to get a common, uncommon, or a rare. But the rare chance is obviously fairly low, and it's more expensive. And then finally, you have the really, really expensive container, which gives you a chance to get anything, up to even like a legendary type of item if you have that kind of a rarity system in your game. That one's, like I said, really expensive, and there's a very, very small chance that you'll actually get that super rare item. But that chance is there. So for people willing to take that risk, they also can therefore get a commensurate reward out of it, which is proportionate to the risk that they're taking. And of course, there's always the concept of the completionist. And that's the person who, when you have a set of things in a game, whether it's a card game or characters for a game, all that sort of thing. Thank you. There will always be people who want to make sure they have one of everything. So the completionist is going to be very incentivized to try to make sure that he can get every possible item out of your set. Okay. So the very, very simplest example. The simple example here is of just taking an action and getting a reward. In the example title that I created, you'll see that I added several things to the catalog. I added a bag of gold, a sword of stabbiness, a potion of healing, and a song of charm. The bag of gold is a bundle. The bundle contains a virtual currency, gold in this case. The Sword of Stabbiness is just a sword. It's a non-consumable item, so once the player has it, they have it. The Potion of Healing is a consumable. And the Song of Charm is something that I defined as it has a usage duration, so it's consumable over time. In other words, once the player gets it, they have a certain amount of time that it will remain in their inventory, after which it disappears. Okay, so with those items defined, I then create a random drop table, and you'll have to excuse me. There we are. Let's make sure it's updated. There we go. I create a random drop table which uses the items in the chest. Now, I've just set them to the same weights. And the weighting factors in the drop table determine the odds. Basically, we add all the weights together, normalize it, and then do a randomization when we're picking something from the random drop table. So in this case, because I give them all the same weight, the odds are equal for all, 25%. Feel free to play around with the weights all you like with the random drop tables. The odds automatically update as you do that, so you'll always have a clear picture of exactly how rare something is for any given drop table. Okay, so I named my drop table Beat the Monster. And that's because, I'm going to go back to the previous slide just for a moment. In the upper right corner there, what you'll see, there we go, is the onMonsterKilled handler of a JavaScript function. This particular JavaScript handler is in our GitHub, in our Cloud Samples repository, specifically in the rewards example. So in there, what you'll find is a defined table showing some rewards, which would need to be set up in your game in order for you to be able to use them. And then when you kill the monster, you get the reward. In this case, my example here, what you would want to set it to is giving the reward of the chest that gives the random item. Okay. So obviously, you can see here, defined the random drop table, and then over on the right, I've defined a container, which is the defeat monster chest. That container has an instance of beat the monster random drop table in it. And it's got, you'll notice under quantity 1, that's because when unlock container is called on this container, we're going to pick one thing from the beat the monster table based upon the weights that we've provided and add it to the user's inventory. And again, if the container is set to have a usage count, it's a consumable. When it's opened, the item is consumed from its usage count, and if the usage count drops to 0, it is then removed from the player's inventory. You'll also notice that there's no key defined for this container, and that's because it's not locked. There's no key that the player is going to have to buy. Okay. So like I said, very, very simple, basic example. Now the more complex, let's get into the details of this. A collectible card game or a trading card game usually has a number of different aspects to any particular card. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and define a card game with these aspects. So you've got the elements, air, earth, fire, and water. So those are the magical properties, let's call them, of the item that the card represents. The rarity of the card can be uncommon, common, rare, or legendary. Obviously, much harder. It's much harder to get things that are more rare, and the scale goes up, let's say, logarithmically for those. The actual item type, accessory, I called it here, is I'm sorry, that's, you'll have to excuse me, that should actually be referring to the type of the card, which is actually type weapons, accessories, armor or spells. So I've listed out accessories here and spells. Those are two of the types. There are also weapons and armor. So, okay, we have accessories, which can be rings, amulets, belts, or a mustache. And then the spell, the blast, shield, rune, and golem. For the weapons, they're defined as the sword, the mace, the bow, and the staff. And then for the armors, we have a helmet, one that's just called armor, which I really just mean body armor, gauntlets, and boots. Okay, so those are all the possible variations of the aspects of the cards: the element, the item type, and the rarity. Okay, now obviously, once you get all the combinatorial possibilities out of this, you've got an enormous catalog of items. You can see there, if you squint and look real close, I've got a common air sword, a common earth sword, a common fire sword, a common water sword, and on and on and on and on and on. Everything up to the legendaries of each element and item type, all combined together. So you build out the base catalog, and you use custom properties to define the global values for these things. So bear in mind, properties that you define, key value pairs that you define for items in your catalog are intended to be global to all items in your game. That way, you can change those values in your catalog, and that change is then used by all the clients because the client gets the catalog as part of starting up, caches it locally, and then uses it whenever it's looking at an item instance in the player's inventory to determine what those properties are. And of course, the item instances in the player's inventory can also have custom properties defined for it so that you can have overrides on those globals or distinct properties which aren't defined globally for the individual item instances. Okay, so now this is the interesting part. We create the base level drop tables. Okay, so common fire weapons. It's an example of one of the bottommost layers of your definitions of your drop tables. So in this case, it's a common fire sword, common fire mace, common fire bow, and a common fire staff. Now, you'd also have a common earth weapons drop table. You would have a common fire armor table. You would have all the various combinations of this. That creates your bottommost layer so that you can then combine those in the ways that you need to create drop tables for higher level. So you have common weapons. The common weapon drop table can pick from any one of the 4 elements. Similarly, you could have a common air table which picks from any of the 4 item types. So it would draw from common air weapons, common air armors, common air items, and common air spells. Okay, and then moving up to the next layer above that, you can see I've defined a common cards. So that's all common weapons, all common armors, all common items, and all common spells. And within each of those are references to other drop tables, each of which has the next layer down. So common weapons is a drop table, which you can see just below, or above on your screen, which contains common air weapons, earth weapons, fire weapons, water weapons. The same would apply for common armors, common items, common spells. And then obviously you'd also build an uncommon cards table, you'd build a rare cards table, etc. That way, then at the topmost level, the highest level of random drop table you define would be what you see here, any random card. And this is a table that defines, draw one card completely randomly from the entire set of all available cards. You can see here I've defined common cards as having 1,000 weight, uncommon 100, rare 10, and then legendary 1. And over on the right then, you see how those odds work out, with it being a 90% chance, roughly, to get the common card, 9% for uncommon, 0.9% for a rare, and then 0.09% for a legendary card. As like I say, this is just one example. Obviously, the rarity of how you want to define things for your game is going to be completely up to you. And because you can combine the drop tables and nest them in this manner, you can build out a very, very rich set of random drop tables and a lot of variations on it. So when you look at that random card table, one possibility is, what if you wanted to run a special weekend event where there was an increased chance to get rare and legendary cards? You could just as easily define a table which is, weekend special random card, and have higher weight values for the rares and legendaries. Okay, so then, if you wanted to build a booster pack for a game like Magic, for example, you can see there on the right, what you would do is you would take a container in your inventory, in your catalog, you would build a container in your catalog, and in the definition of the container, you would reference the specifics that you want for the contents of the pack. And this is the distribution here. I'm giving you an example of So 5 common, 2 uncommon, and 1 rare. This is actually a very common pattern that you'll see in trading card games. If you guys are not familiar, Cardamundi, one of the largest card printing companies in the world, are highly experienced at this. And many years ago, I had the opportunity I was very fortunate enough to have the opportunity to talk to them about the lessons learned over the years about distribution of cards. And what they found was that if the distribution, you have a rarity, let's say, for cards, some are more rare than others. If your distribution is completely random, that actually creates some pretty significant dissatisfaction in your user base. Because sure, it could be that somebody will open a pack and have a bunch of rare cards, but at the same time, somebody else is going to open a pack and get absolutely no rare cards. And the odds of absolutely no rare cards, because of your distribution of rarity, could be very high. Now, obviously, your mileage may vary. You may have a very sophisticated design for your game and your rarity system, which may result in, you know, a really great user response by doing completely random draws. This is just one recommendation based upon some advice that I received a long time ago. Okay, and this is also, like I said, it's also used by many modern card games. So the cautionary tale here, and this is one that we need to all bear in mind. It is a pretty clear example of there not being a great dividing line between what's okay and what's not okay. Crumple Gotcha is something that came up a few years back over in Japan. What happened was there was a game, or actually there was more than one game really, where there were items that you could get in the game, and they had increasing levels of rarity. Some of the items were exceedingly rare, I mean, just amazingly rare. But the rarest item of all to get was that complete set grand prize you see on the end. But there was absolutely no way to get the complete set item through a random draw. What you had to do was do random draw, random draw, random draw to get all of the items that would add up to getting you the complete set. So once you had, in the picture here you'll see, once you had items A, B, C, and D, then you would get the complete set. And there are a number of variations on this. In some games, you would get all the items together and then the complete set would be added. In others, you would get all the items together and then you had to consume them. You had to turn them in order to get the complete set item. But then you could get more of the complete set item by getting the full collection again. There were actually people who spent literally thousands of dollars trying to get a complete set in these games. Because of that, and because of the way these games played out and the dissatisfaction this caused among some of the users, there are a number of complaints leveled against these games to the regulatory authorities in Japan. And the Japan Consumer Affairs Agency stepped in and they came up with a law, which is the Japanese Act Against Unjustifiable Premiums and Misleading Representations. You can do some searches online. If you look up the information on this, or Crumple Gotcha in general, you'll find a number of articles that discuss what happened at the time and various analyses of it. The harshest result was that Gree and DNA, two of the largest companies with Crumple Gotcha games, took a pretty significant hit to their stock. Now those companies, obviously they're awesome companies and they're doing great these days. They are in fact two of the companies that are in the board that regulates for this these days, because of course, you know, they have the most experience in it and they have the best mindset for being able to look at things and make a determination as to whether or not it would be in violation of the law. Because if you read the full text of this, which I will certainly not show you in this talk because it is long and dry, it does get pretty deep into the weeds of trying to define something which is really not a clearly stated rule, frankly. Now, what was the issue, ultimately? Ultimately, the issue was they created a system whereby, in order to get that completion, you had to either do thousands and thousands and thousands of draws, just because of the rarity levels, which would either take you, years to do, or spend tons of money. Now, the way the law reads, that's not specifically prohibited. What's prohibited is effectively doing it in such a way that the players are disadvantaged to the point where they basically have no choice but to spend money, but you're telling them that they don't have to. So you can see where that's really, really kind of a fuzzy line. And I would strongly recommend, if you're looking into doing a system that sounds like it might be close to this, certainly you should be talking to a legal representative to get solid advice on this. The advice I'm giving you here is basically be cautious about it. And ultimately, if the things that you're doing are pleasing your player base, if they're happy, you're probably in a pretty good place. Because obviously, who's going to be filing complaints about your game? Dissatisfied customers. So if your goal is to make your players happy and you're successful at that, odds are good that you're not in danger here. But again, if you're moving into the space, if that looks like the kind of system you've designed, certainly you'll want to check in with a legal representative that you trust. Okay, and what are we going to be doing going forward? What did we learn from all this? Excuse me. What did we learn from this? Yes, we learned that delight is good, despair is bad. Like I said, if you're making your players happy, they're not very likely to be upset with you. But if you're giving them, what's in the box, absolutely nothing, well, they're not likely to be very happy about that. Okay, so what are we looking at doing? Well, one of the biggest things I'll say is we're looking for your input. We have a lot of ideas for things that we might be doing in future with various forms of randomization for games. But really what it comes down to is, what are the needs of the games that are being built in our service right now? So one possibility, random ranges. So right now you can define a container or a bundle which contains virtual currency to give to the player, or items, or whatever. But let's go with virtual currency as a specific example. What if you wanted to create a container that can give the player a range of the virtual currency, so anywhere from 1 to 100? Right now you can absolutely do that using CloudScript, but it's not a built-in feature of the containers just yet. Is that something that you need? Let us know. The other would be pseudorandom rewards. This is certainly something that people who are closely following titles like Clash of Clans are aware of. And it is actually a very good system for a lot of reasons. A pseudo-random reward, the idea is that the actual chances of the reward being certain things are in part based upon the past history. So the odds are not fixed to be the same randomization for every draw, like a truly random system, but instead are varied based upon the existing economy, the existing items that are in the world, so that you are able to control the balance of your game a little more closely. And there are quite a few games that are doing that these days. If a pseudo-random reward system is something that you need, we'd also want to hear from you about that. And we'd certainly want to talk to you about the details of how you view pseudo-random rewards working for your game. But yeah, I mean, in short, we're looking for your thoughts on what your needs are for your titles. And then the example that I give below, just going back again to the Cardamundi advice, is the most recent, actually maybe not the most recent, the Magic Online Vintage Masters booster pack that they introduced specifically breaks down as 10 common, 3 uncommon, 1 rare or mythic rare, and then 1 premium foil card or a power 9. Like I said, this is just, it's a common pattern that you'll see for trading card games. It's something that a lot of them do. It's a good rule of thumb to work with, excuse me, if you don't have a specific model in mind already. Okay, so with that, we've still got plenty of time remaining, so I wanted to turn it over to questions. I know this is a fairly complex area, so feel free to hit us with anything you got.
Yeah, no, we appreciate it. We've got a few questions in. So are there any best practices when it comes to distributing rarity or psychology on how players should get legendaries? So I think that follows on to some of what you were talking about.
Yeah, it certainly does. So distribution. Now, the main thing about the psychology of distribution is I really don't like the casino model, and I prefer to stay away from it. So I've heard people to refer to it as the flashing lights. I prefer to think of it this way. If you have varying levels of rarity in your game, the player needs to be able to understand, and this is, players, bear in mind, you shouldn't create a system where the player needs to go out to a wiki and read details to figure out how it works. It should be fairly obvious from in the system. The player should be able to see that he has the opportunity to get even the rarest of items and how he can do that in a relatively clear manner. I mean, if you're giving out items in packs where you have scarcity within the packs and the rares are very hard to get, just be very clear and upfront. Hey, here's the distribution. You don't need to give them the percentages, obviously, the numbers, especially since you'll probably want to adjust them over time. But just say, here's the rarity distribution for my card packs. If you've got legendaries and you don't want them to be part of the card packs, tell them exactly how they can get them. I mean, if you have a system where people need to get a collection of cards in order to get the bonus card, like I said, that may fall into the Crumple Gotcha space, but if it's something where you've designed the system well, players really like it, they can see clearly how they can get to the legendary items. They don't feel like they're completely disadvantaged if they're not spending money. You're going to be fine. Just be very clear and upfront with your players about how they can do these things. There's also one concept that I didn't pull into this deck because I didn't want to sidetrack us too much. There's also the concept of increasing odds based upon some additive factor. So let's say, for example, you've got items in your game which you can combine, fusion type processes or evolution of cards. Maybe what you do in your system is you've got a system where you take 3 of the same kind of card and you can fuse those to create an item which is always of the next rarity level up, though it's a random item from within that rarity, maybe. And that's just one example. But there's a small chance that it'll be 2 levels up, let's say. And then you can increase that small chance by throwing in a bunch of virtual currency at it. So maybe you have even a premium currency would work for this. Let's say you have gold and gems in your game. So let's say for 50 gold, you have a double chance of getting the legendary item instead of a rare item when you're turning uncommons in and fusing them. Or if you drop in 500 gold, maybe you have a 4 times chance. Again, this comes back to the risk and reward part we were talking about earlier. Giving players the ability to see how they can get there fairly clearly is going to be the most important part to the psychological aspect of it. The other aspect to it, of course, is don't make it so hard to get there that people just automatically fall into the pattern of thinking there's absolutely no way I'm going to get that without just throwing money at you like crazy. It is a delicate balance. I mean, it certainly is something that we could spend a whole nother webinar, and that actually is something we might do in the future. If this is something you guys really want to dive deep on, this is worthy of a whole webinar on its own, is the design of the rarity levels and how to keep your players engaged, how to design for randomness without making things so tough to get that your players just walk away.
Some other questions that we've gotten, and for those of you that are listening, please feel free to definitely send in your questions and we'll try to work through. When you look at kind of your product roadmap, how are we thinking about implementing an achievement system into PlayFab?
Oh, an achievement system, okay. So yeah, achievements are a great example of ways you can distribute rewards to players as well, because you can define an achievement in your game, and I know that achievements everybody points back to one of the classics, the Xbox Live achievement system, which is really an achievement system that gives you points to your gamer profile. But in truth, achievement systems can be a lot more. You could define a statistic in your game, which once a player reaches a certain point with that statistic, just every time it gets updated, you're comparing it to some title data defined value that you're using to say when the player reaches this point, that's an achievement, right? So that's how you could, I'm just describing how you could create an achievement system right now in the system. So when the player passes that level, then you send the notifications so the client displays hey, you're awesome, you did this great thing. And you use the grant item call, preferably, you'd want to be doing this all in CloudScript, obviously. But you'd use the grant item call to give the player some item, and that could be a container or a bundle even, which gives the player some randomly determined item. We are thinking about implementing an achievement system down the road. I shouldn't say thinking about it. It is absolutely on our backlog, yes. Are we implementing it right now? No, and I can't give you a date for it right now. Let's just be really clear about the way the roadmap works too. We prioritize based upon the needs of the aggregate of the community, by and large. I mean, obviously, we also have some strategic goals that we've set for ourselves, which are part of how we determine what things we're working on next. But part of the work that we do is absolutely dedicated to the things that people are telling us they need most. So if the majority of people come to us and tell us that they absolutely need us to implement a pre-built achievement system, we would want to work with those people, obviously, to define what all of the requirements are for it. And we would want to find a way to get that into our upcoming schedule. Until we have something which is locked into a sprint, so we absolutely know that we are working on it and have a set delivery date, we will not be promising dates to people, because the last thing we would ever want to do is give you a date and then not be able to deliver on something on that date. And because we're a live service, unless something is in the upcoming sprints locked into our schedule, there is always the chance that something could change about our schedule at the last minute. So believe me when I say it is something we're very interested in doing. When we reach the point that we are able to get that into our schedule, we will be working with people who have talked to us about needing an achievement system, so we get their requirements. So if it's something you need and you haven't already told us, please be sure to reach out to us at either at devrel@playfab.com, it's DEVREL at playfab.com, or click on the help tab on the main site, go to our forums, and let us know in the feature requests area that it's something that you're interested in. I believe there's an active thread. I'm not going to interrupt the webinar for this, but I believe there's an active thread already on achievements. So you could just pile onto that and say, yes, this is something I would also appreciate having.
Great. Another question came in. Are there facilities for printing out things like table definitions and item definitions that you talked about? Or is there a separate application we should access? Or should we write our own tools that interface directly to the table? So it sounds like, how could I print out or get at those table definitions?
So if you're referring to the table definitions that I showed in the webinar, I can certainly make that available to you. The JSON used to define the catalog items that I built. I don't think they're going to necessarily be tremendously useful to you, because they're my cute and simple example for the purposes of the webinar. If what you're looking to do is build out a complex set of items for your game, you are absolutely going to want to manage that in some sort of tool like Excel or similar, some sort of a spreadsheet where you can have all the properties of the item in one place and be able to do all of the math on the rarities, the strengths of things and things like that, so that you can make sure that your game is balanced really well. Being able to then go from that into a catalog entry does mean that you're going to need to convert that in some way. I mean, maybe you export the Excel into a CSV and then read the CSV using a custom-built tool. We don't have a generic tool that would do that for you right now, largely because the factors you'd be pulling in are going to be they're going to be fairly custom to each game. If I squint, I can sort of see a generic way to put together one that could create catalog items, but it would be, it would require needing a specific set of columns for the definition, which it feels a little awkward to me. I mean, I'll be very open. It feels a little awkward that we would be imposing a specific design to a tool for that. But that said, if it's something where you guys feel there's a lot of need for a very generic tool for that sort of behavior, or for that process, let's say, certainly let us know. And you know what? I also want to take the opportunity to point out one other thing. We strongly encourage people to be sharing best practices or tools that they create. We have our forum space where people can exchange their ideas, help each other out. The CloudScript space, the CloudScript samples GitHub repository, is absolutely available for you to submit your own CloudScripts to. Similarly, if you guys want to share tools and you want us to host a GitHub space for it, I would be absolutely happy to set up a space for that. And the more the merrier.
Okay, I guess another feature idea or feature thought was, what about affecting drop rates on the fly based on a player's inventory?
Right. So exactly, that's what I was talking about in terms of pseudo-random drop tables, or I'm sorry, pseudo-random awards, or pseudo-random behavior to this. That is something that some games have taken to doing. It's something that's gotten a little more attention recently, which is one of the reasons why it's on our backlog list of potential directions for features that we might want to include. Now, we haven't really heard from anyone about needing this for their game yet, which is one of the reasons why it's sitting on the backlog. So if that is something that you need, let us know. Right now, the way you would do that is you could affect it based upon using CloudScript. I know I talk about CloudScript a lot. Honestly, it's one of my favorite tools in our toolbox because it gives you the opportunity, using all the server API calls, to do just about anything else you can think of that isn't already included in our service. So in this case, to influence the drop rate, what you would do is you could have the random rates defined within a table. You could then have your rule base of how you're defining. Let's say you want to be able to give the player items, but you never want to give them more than one of some particular legendary card. Let's go with the card game example again. You could actually define it as you could define many drop tables in your game and pick one based upon what the player's inventory is. Obviously, that would require you to create an awful lot of drop tables, potentially. So I wouldn't necessarily go that direction, but another way to do it would be to have a listing of items in your CloudScript, which you can pull from based upon the items that are in the player's inventory. Sorry, each of those is going to require some work on the part of the developer. So I think ultimately, if you have a need around pseudo-random right now, let us know so we can make sure we've got you on the list so that we're using that to help influence our decision making about our prioritization. But B, contact us at either through the forums or the DevRel alias so that we can work with you on your idea and come up with an effective solution rather than me try to spitball one right off the top of my head that might or might not fit your specific game's needs.
So another feature idea was to be able to do randomization in a way that guarantees players don't get something they already had before. So it's kind of like a re-roll for no duplicates.
Right. And that is, again, that goes back to the pseudo-random concept. It's another aspect of it. One of which being, there's only to the player, there should only ever be one of a certain card. So they should never get it again. There should always be a chance they can get it, if they don't have it. But if they already have it, there should be zero chance that they get it. Yeah, that's, like I said, you could do that by doing some very specific logic in CloudScript. You could do it by having different tables that you point the player to based upon what's in their current inventory. Again, you could check that through CloudScript, or in this case, you could potentially check that on the client, although, as always, anything you trust the client for is at risk of being hacked, which is one of the main reasons we introduced CloudScript to start. So yeah, in that case as well, I would say let's talk about what the specific needs of your game are, and we can help to design a solution for you.
And then another question, I guess more of a feature idea, is make possible to generate random items from one manually created item with defined rarities and attributes.
A random generated item from manually created item with defined rarities and attributes. I'm going to take a stab in the dark because I don't think I quite follow the question, but I think what you might be talking about is an object which is created out of a set of sub items. So I think Borderlands 2 is an awesome example of this, or Borderlands 1 for that matter, where you're creating an item which is procedurally generated. So I didn't bring up the concept of procedurally generated items in this talk because that's, again, that can go quite deep as well into a whole nother area. Procedurally generated items are also something that are on our backlog as something that we'd like to look into when we have a customer, or set of customers preferably, who have a need for that. So yeah, if that's something that you want to do, let's talk about it deeply and get your requirements. And obviously, by the way, if the answer that I'm giving right now does not quite match what you were asking as a question, feel free to just send us another question and we can keep going with the conversation. But yes, right now, if you wanted to implement pseudo-random, a procedurally generated item, you would probably want to do that either via Cloud Script or by having a set of random tables that you use to generate the components of the item and assemble them on the client. Since the components are coming from the service directly, there'd be very little chance of the player cheating it. I mean, if it's not managed correctly, there is always the chance that a player could, ask for 10 different items to be randomly generated and then use a hack client to pick and choose which ones get combined in which ways. You can obviously do some checks and balances on that using Cloud Script. Again, that's just a good cheat detection mechanism or even cheat prevention mechanism. So yeah, I keep saying this. If you want to dive deep on that, let's talk directly. I think that the needs of games that do that are going to be fairly custom. I mean, there's some things you can say about a procedurally generated item system, which are at a very general level, but I'd really like to get the specifics of what your needs are so that we can do that.
And it just so happens that someone was nice enough to say that they had a need for procedurally generated items.
Awesome. Yes. I mean, I will say quite frankly, I was a big fan of the Borderlands games. That's why I used it as my example. And I think that the bazillions of guns that you can get is it's a neat feature. It's something that really provides the players with something that, whenever they're getting loot from a monster, it's just so many variations on what they can get that they really have to stop and pay attention all the time, which is great. It creates good player engagement. It keeps them coming back because, like I was saying in this talk, that what if is still there. I killed this thing and I got, this item which is really awesome, but could I get a better one? It's always the chance. Those systems can create some pretty significant imbalances, I will say, in your game systems. If you guys out there are players of the Borderlands games, I'm aware of. I wasn't lucky enough to get one myself, but I have a couple of friends who played a fair bit, and they wound up getting items which were just so ludicrously powerful that they a lot of the fights became kind of cakewalks. But at the same time, yes, that's a system that we're definitely thinking about. So appreciate your input. We're going to note the name of your group so that we make sure that you're basically on the list. So for when we're looking at prioritization. But if you could also send an email to us at devrel, DEVREL @playfab.com, so that we make sure we have the details from you on what your requirements are for that system. That would be great. We always want to make sure that anytime we're pulling something out of the backlog and building the system that we're hearing is needed, we want to make sure that we're fulfilling all the requirements. We have a number of people here who have a lot of experience in the games industry. Myself, I've been in 19 years now, I believe, and I've worked on a lot of different types of games, worked with a lot of different developers. So I've got a lot of experience, and I can certainly come up with a lot of requirements myself. But and I don't want to. There are plenty of other people on the team as well who have many years of experience in the games industry, and we'll come up with many things. But there's always room for additional input. There's always the chance that we're going to overlook something that you want. So yeah, the more input we get, the better.
So I want to thank Brendan for taking the time to work with us today. As always, if you have additional questions, please contact us at devrel @playfab.com, DEVREL @playfab.com. We hope you enjoyed the webinars. We have just posted a bunch of webinars at playfab.com/webinars. We are finalizing, we've gotten a lot of requests, and we'll be finalizing about 6 webinars, which we'll be posting up probably early next week around PlayFab and getting started with Unity development as well. So we hope that you guys are enjoying the webinar series, and we look forward to working with you. And as always, if you have any requests around webinars, please feel free to send them to webinars@playfab.com, WEBINARS. And with that, we will post up our slide deck and our video to our blog. So that's playfab.com/blog, and that should be available hopefully later today or Monday, depending on how things go. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and thank everyone for joining us. Thank Brendan for spending the time on presenting today. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar.
All right, thanks everybody. Really appreciate your time.